Hello, I'm Alan, and this is a first look at the Lightwave Sigma S10 tent. This is a lightweight, not necessarily ultra lightweight tent with minimal footprint. It's a pretty stealthy little tent. I can fit it in a small space. It's nice and green. The smallest footprint I think you'd sensibly get away with to go camping. There's enough room inside, and you get a reasonable porch to put your stuff in. It's self-supporting in the main frame, and you need a guy to pull the vestibule out at the front, and it's a good idea to have a guy at the back, which helps to pull the side out a little bit here, and that also gives it extra support and gives you a little bit more space inside. But it's got a reasonable headroom. It's 1 metre high. The thing is, what you see is what you get. All of that space from the outside is what you've got on the inside, because there's no double layer. And the good thing is, you could fit this in tiny little spaces if you're trying to find somewhere in the woods between gorse or other bushes. On the face of it, you could think this is a budget tent. It certainly isn't. It looks a bit like one of those kiddie tents, but that's where the similarity ends. It's certainly got some high-tech features, particularly this material. It's got a carbon coating on the inside, which absorbs moisture. It doesn't even bead on the inside with condensation. And I did a little test, which you'll see in a minute. So when you're inside, the walls feel dry, even after you've been sleeping all night. And I was out in 6 degrees, and it stayed dry inside, very comfortable. No running down the walls. The walls are dry at the bottom, a little bit damp to touch at the top, and that's about it. This material is quite thick, and so you don't get a lot of light penetrating through it. This tent is 20,000 millimetre hydrostatic head, extremely waterproof. I think the ground sheet and the vestibule fly are a little bit less than that, but nevertheless waterproof. And these guying points, double guys on each corner if you want to use them, if you need them, would hold this thing up in a storm quite happily. It's a pretty tough tent, I reckon, but we'll see. It'll get used in time. It's a very simple construction, as you can see, just the 2 poles, and if you had this in a wind on its own, sure, it's going to get blown about, but with those guy lines and guying points, that would be a very rigid tent, very firm. It comes with the guy ropes. They've supplied 2mm nylon. I would have thought that at the price point this tent is aimed at, they could have supplied Dyneema, which is non-water absorbing. It's about 1/4 of the weight, and it would just add to a lightweight spec, in my opinion. They give you nice quality pegs with it. They go in the ground very easily, and they seem to hold pretty well. They call them lightning pegs, and they have little ones in the corners called flash pegs, which are about half the width. These weigh about 4 grams, and these are about 10 grams. And you get 8 of those and 4 of those. The tent, as you see it here, without pegs, comes in at about 0.98 kilos, I think, and all the guys and the pegs add up to another 150 grams. I shall be lightening that in due course. The inner door ties back nicely inside, gives you lots of open space, as does this door. What you could do with this is just tie this loop back to the guy point, and that's probably what I'll end up doing if I want to keep the front all open. And this is what it's like inside if you don't use any guy lines at all. I haven't even got the porch stretched out at all. It's just the door. Sides, I suppose, flopping very slightly, but as they're dry it's not really a problem. It's 7 AM. The tent is dry to the feel at the bottom here, damp at the top here, a bit wet but not beading, certainly not running water anywhere at all. And this is the carbon treated fly sheet, well, and inner. The inner itself feels dry, the doorway, slightly damp, and I think that's only where it's come into contact with the outer. And this is the more conventional material on the outer. You can see that's quite wet. You can see when I touch it, the slight beading disappears. This is what it's like sitting up. I'm 5'9". I've got enough headroom. It's okay. What I have noticed is that where there's the ground sheet wall, that does feel a bit wet to the touch, but it's not saturated. It is a damp morning, but this feels just dry. So the material seems to do its job. So let's have a look at it from the outside. The material feels dry. It all feels pretty dry actually. But you can see how the condensation has formed on the inside of the normal ripstop nylon. So it's a pretty damp morning. A little bit of drizzle in the air. And slight breeze now, so maybe it'll dry out. It's a nice compact tent. Should be pretty good for finding a little spot in the woods, somewhere where you can't always pitch a tent that's got full guy lines. You can pitch this without the guy lines. I've just stuck the two side ones out, just to pull the sides out a little bit. You can always find a bush to tie those to. It's pretty useful. One thing's for certain, I won't be leaving my microfiber cloth at home anytime soon. So it soon comes off, soaks it all up. And it's just this fly at the front, the awning, that gets a bit wet. We're going to take a look inside. I'll give you a nice little rollback for the door here. Unfortunately, although it's a freestanding tent, they don't give you one for this side. And I think that's an omission personally. Inside, this is the material. This carbon coating on the inside apparently just soaks up any moisture and wicks it through to the outside, and that seems to work quite effectively. What you do notice is that with this fly material being normal ripstop nylon and beading in the normal way with condensation or rain, and it soaks it up, it is quite a wet material, and when you get in and out of the tent it can drip, so you'll get little drips coming inside the tent. So I'd almost like to see this as the same material as on the outer part of the tent, the main part of the tent. Inside, there's enough room in there. Get little pockets in the corners, that end and that end. You get a little light loop in the top. The inner is solid material there, ripstop, and the top panel is no-seam mesh. So, enough to keep the draft out down here, enough to keep the mozzies out up there, and this material feels quite warm as well, so I didn't feel chilly in the night at all, and this was down to about 6 degrees, maybe 5 degrees overnight. There wasn't a frost. And as I say, it's got these guys everywhere, So you can make it a very stable tent in all sorts of conditions, if needs be. You can tension the poles. There's 2 holes at each corner. So I've got it on the looser at the moment, but you could tighten it up if you wanted to and make perhaps the centre a little bit higher. As I say, I found enough headroom. I want to move this tent, having pitched it somewhere. This is what I do. That's the beauty of a self-supporting tent. So it doesn't need trekking poles because it's got the poles that come with it. They're DAC poles, high quality poles. So I got this tent because it's small footprint and also because of its ability to be able to be pitched in places where you can't afford to be totally dependent on guy ropes. The fact that these poles will just fully support it and enable me to move it around, I find is a terrific advantage for that. And because it's so small and so low, it's quite a stealthy little tent. You can tuck it in a corner in lots of places. So looking forward to trying it, and I'll do a review when I've had a chance to try it properly. Thanks for watching.